My foot is stuck. In honor of this Saturday's video, I'm wearing my NYPD t-shirt that I got at Goodwill. I went Goodwill shopping, not enough to make a thrift haul out of it, but I got some good t-shirts. The reason for this is because I have another scary story for you guys. More so, I have the finale to a story for you guys. So last week I posted the first part to There's a Strange Cop Who Stalks Kids in My Neighborhood. Have I been saying neighborhood? I mean hometown. A lot of you guys wanted to hear the rest of it, and I assumed that you guys would. It's gonna be interesting because, like I said, there's a lot of dialogue in this second part, but I'm gonna try because I was told that the third part of the story is just amazing, so I really want to get through all of it, and obviously you have to read the second part to get to the third part. Also, quick update, I got a tattoo today. Yes, I got it today. I got a little cactus on my finger. I don't want to do like a super close-up right now of it because I just got it done, so I still have some of the Sharpie left on my hand, so I don't want people to be like, she fucked it up, but these little cactus. Some of the black Sharpie, because she like drew it in black, okay? She like traced the center of my finger in a green Sharpie, that's why there's green inside of it, and then she traced the cactus with a black Sharpie. So I just have a whole lot of Sharpie mess going on. It's not green, it's just a blackened skin cactus. But yeah, I love it. I'm so excited. I've been wanting a cactus tattoo for a while, but I impulsively got it on my finger, but I love it. Okay, now let's get right into the story. So this is the finale to There's a Strange Cop Who Stalks Kids in My Hometown. It was a long day. After finding the ghoulish evidence in my car, Officer Jacobson called in another guy from the local force to come by with evidence bags. Neither of us talked to each other while Jacobson's partner, a much younger guy named Rocky, fresh out of junior college, carefully removed the solitary jack in the index card from my car. This probably has fingerprints, he said to us. Nobody responded. Jacobson was badly shaken. He was normally a very stoic person, the classic Western pioneer type who took responsibility for everything and would be ashamed to ask for help. The uncharacteristic emotional roller coaster I'd seen him ride over the past day was disconcerting. While the evidence was deposited, it seemed as if he was actively trying to ignore reality until it changed itself into something he liked better. He just sat in the car with the door wide open, a barely smoked cigarette smoldering between two fingers held between his knees. Officer Jacobson? Rocky asked, after stowing the evidence into his car. Yes, Rocky? Jacobson responded, half-heartedly. I'm gonna send this to Eva to get it looked at. It looks like the car is clean though. Your friend should be good to use it again. Jacobson nodded and tossed his cigarette on the ground. He snuffed it out with the top of his shoe. Say hi to her for me. I'm gonna help him get this car back home, he said, pointing to me. Rocky nodded and left. Jacobson didn't budge from his seat until the sound of his tires crunching on the gravel had dissipated into the morning air. It could be him for all we know, he said, his tone low with a tinge of frustration. Rocky? He's too nice, I said, trying to be reassuring. Plenty of bad people are nice. How you act around others doesn't mean a thing. If that was the only thing that mattered, then nothing bad would ever happen. He went back to the bed of his truck to get the cable. Help me hook up your car, and then I'm still going to need you behind your wheel to steer. He towed my car back to my house, and for the rest of the day, I just sat around. I guess I'm kind of a boring person anyways. I ran track at school, but as far as other hobbies went, my free time was a desert. I liked video games and shooting, and that was pretty much it. And smoking, of course. But something told me that I'd have to put that stuff on hold. I was deeply confused by a lot of what had happened. The biggest issue on my mind was how, even though the urban legend I grew up with wasn't true at all, it ended up happening anyways. Yeah, maybe some parent told their teenager one day that a scary cop would kidnap them from the church parking lot for smoking weed. Officer Jacobson thought it was bullshit too, and he gets paid to keep kids from doing stuff like that. Yet, what happened the night before was almost an exact replica of the story. Caden and I went to the church parking lot to smoke. A cop in sunglasses rolled up, and we later found out that he's probably responsible for kidnapping another kid. Why was he after us? What made the guy kidnap Officer Jacobson's younger brother? Was he involved in the other missing persons cases in my town? Why were those cases missing from the local police station? It was all a mess, and all I did was sit on my couch while my brain tied itself in knots thinking about it. My phone buzzed, and I read a text from a new number. This is Herm Jacobson. I need to meet with you at the station. Do you want someone to pick you up? He's missing? I was shocked. Didn't he go home to his parents last night? I asked fervently. Jacobson seemed to hang his head even lower than he had when we found the bloody jack. I dropped him off. His dad was working the night shift, so I offered, he explained. Caden was gone. His mom had checked in on him sleeping mid-morning. But just an hour before Officer Jacobson texted me, she noticed that he was nowhere to be found. His things hadn't been touched, nothing was stolen or moved. It was like he vanished into thin air. The good news is we have a lead, Rocky piped up from his desk. It's really only half a lead, Jacobson qualified. There were prints on the card, and not only that, it matches the description of the man you both saw last night. Not that we can prove, Jacobson said. You can, Rocky retorted. The file might be gone, but we definitely have enough to build a solid theory. The prints belong to a man named Eugene Ball. He was a lieutenant at the police department who was hired in 1972, but there are no termination records for him. Even better, old Herm here remembers that he was actually the first person of the 4 missing persons files that were stolen from our records. It makes no sense, Jacobson said, standing up from his chair. If that was Lieutenant Ball, he would be in his 60s by now. The man I saw last night was much younger, but he was in an old car, and his fingerprints were on something he appeared to have left in the car. That's a lot, Herm. I looked at Jacobson. That sounds like him. That beater could have been from the 70s for sure. Did Joshua say anything about how old the officer who took Caleb looked? Jacobson perked up a little. No, he didn't, he said, and furrowed his brow in thought. Is that a good thing? I asked. I don't know. Joshua barely said anything at the time, and I don't know where he is now. As good as the information is, I think it's a dead end. The phone rang on Rocky's desk and he answered it, and after a few short exchanges, he looked at us. That's dispatch. A couple people went to the church this morning and saw a guy hanging out in the parking lot alone, and when one of them came back just a few minutes ago to get something, he was still there. I'm gonna go check it out, he said as he grabbed his hat from a rack by the door and left us. Do you think that could be him? I asked Jacobson. Probably not. It doesn't sound like he's in a cop car. Do you think it's Lieutenant Ball? In the parking lot? No, who shot at us last night. It wouldn't make any sense. You saw him too, right? Did he look like an old man to you? Not really, no, but it was dark, and he was shooting at us. If he was old, we would have noticed. He could be in really good health, I offered. Maybe, but maybe not. Thing is, we can't prove anything. It is a start, and Caden's missing. Maybe we should just go out there and see if he comes back. We? You'd stay home if I was going to do something like that. He was right. It would be bad for him if he took a teenager on police business. It might have been bad for him to even have me at the station while this was all going down, but I didn't bring that up. We sat in silence for a moment before Rocky's voice scratched over Jacobson's radio. Herm, I'm bringing this guy in. Native American male. Doesn't look like he's local. Possession of an unregistered firearm. Jacobson took his radio and spoke into it. He was just sitting in the parking lot? Yeah, he also had this weird mask. I'll need to show you what he had in his car later. It's really something. Thanks, Rocky. Just bring him in and deal with him once we get Caden's stuff up to state. He reholstered his radio and looked at me. Most exciting week of my career, he said. It was only 10 minutes later that Rocky walked in with a heavy-set Indian man, handcuffs keeping his wrists together. He wore what looked to be a traditional dress, a long brown shirt and pants, with several necklaces of colored beads hung around his neck. The combat boots he wore jarringly stood out from the otherwise ancient-looking garb. Jacobson stood up and went over to Rocky and his oddly dressed compatriot. What's his name? He asked Rocky. It's Ralph Jefferson, sir, the Indian man said. What were you doing in that parking lot? Jacobson continued, now addressing Ralph. I can't tell you. Waiting for someone? Someone to use that unregistered pistol on? Jacobson inquired. I have never killed, and I do not want to start now, Ralph explained patiently. What did you have the gun for? Jacobson continued. Ralph looked him up and down and then looked over to me. He made eye contact and then turned back to face Jacobson. You are in danger. He has taken your friend, and if you go looking for him, he will take you too. Are you threatening a police officer? Rocky said seriously. He looks like a cop, doesn't he? Except he drives an old car. He takes children, and you don't see them again, Ralph said. Goosebumps rose up on my arms, and Jacobson rubbed the back of his neck. Who the hell are you? He demanded. I live on the reservation. I practice medicine for my community. Yours too, if you'll let me. There's something very dangerous here, and I'm trying to keep it away, he explained. What is it? I can't say. Jacobson sighed and stepped closer to Ralph. There is a teenager missing, and it looks like somebody broke into the police department to steal important files. It also looks like they got away with it. I'm pretty sure I know who's responsible. I just don't know their name or where they are. If you tell me anything that helps me solve the problem, that pistol of yours might not be such a big deal, Jacobson told him. Rocky looked astonished and went to say something before Ralph spoke up again. He's a witch, what you call a skinwalker. I was going to perform a ritual in the parking lot to keep him away, but he is very powerful. We don't like to say much about them, but what I can say is that he is very dangerous. How did you know to do the ritual in the parking lot? Ralph paused for a moment. I had a dream where I saw him there. He was in his natural state, and he was very strong. You also know about the kids. How do you know about that? I saw them too. He has them. Why? I can't tell you, but they are in danger. Jacobson turned away from him and shook his head. How do I know you're not high off your ass? He said. His name was Caleb. Your brother. Ralph said. You took him, didn't you? Jacobson responded angrily. No, but I know who did, and I can keep him from taking more kids, Ralph said calmly. What about finding him? Can you figure out where he is if you have another dream? Because that would be a hell of a lot more useful. Ralph looked at him for a couple of breaths and spoke hesitantly. I can find him, but he should come with us, he said, pointing at me. We drove with Ralph out to a spot in the nearby desert, where our car kicked up a ton of dust into the dry air only to settle back down in the loose dirt and gravel. He told us to make a stop at his car, which he had been forced to leave in the church parking lot. Once he was there, he took a mask and a small leather pouch which he carried in his lap while he gave us directions to the spot where he would perform what he called his medicine. He told us to sit while he used a small branch to draw complicated diagrams and symbols into the sandy earth. I could hear him quietly muttering something unintelligible under his breath as he did it. He then began to burn some kind of root and passed it over the diagrams on the ground. It was evening, and the setting sun was casting strange shadows across the ground from the desert plant life. In the twilight, Ralph's chanting and ritual burning looked like it had come out of a history textbook about the Old West. Ralph then laid the burning root in the middle of the vague circle softly cut into the dirt in front of us. With a very careful and reverent motion, he pulled a brightly colored flower from the same bag as he had taken the root from. He said a few more words in his own language and then dropped the flower. The small plant touched the root and suddenly a bright red fire shot up from the diagram. A high-pitched whistling sound echoed in my ears and my vision blurred. Ralph and the desert around me disappeared, and instead I was looking at a house with an old police car parked in the driveway. A child, not older than 10 years old, stood at the house in front of me, his back to me. The whistling stopped, and the boy turned to face me. His face was gone. What was left was a torn, bleeding mass of flesh without eyeballs or other definable features. His teeth glistened with blood, and I could see the small movements of his exposed nose cartilage disturbed by his breathing. He opened his mouth, and instead of speaking, he coughed up a small rubber ball and laughed. When I woke up, I was laying in the dirt with Ralph, patting my cheek. I sat up and looked around. Rocky stood just a few feet away with Jacobson, who he seemed to be comforting. He had both of his hands on his shoulders, and he had leaned his face in close to whisper to him. Ralph helped me up, and the two officers turned to look at us. Did you see it too? Jacobson asked. Yeah, the house? Jacobson gulped. Do you recognize it? I shook my head, but Ralph spoke up. I do. It's on the reservation. The night had set in, and we drove Ralph back to his car. He drove behind us as we went back to the station to recoup and figure out what the next step was. My mom texted me just as we walked through the double glass doors. You need to come home. Where are you? Did you know Caden is missing? Officer Jacobson read it over my shoulder. You need to go home, he said. I want him to come with us to the house, Ralph said as he followed behind us into the station. Why do you want a teenager coming with us? Rocky asked. He wants children. It will be easy for him to hide if it's just us, Ralph continued. Officer Jacobson shook his head and rubbed his temple. I'm taking you home, he told me. I can't have you coming with us. We're armed, and you're not. If this thing takes kids, it's just more reason for you to stay as far away as possible, not a reason to come with us. Sorry, Ralph. He finished and looked over at him. Ralph nodded and sat down at one of the desks. Officer Jacobson drove me home, where my parents were waiting in the driveway. He explained that he had to take a statement from me about Caden's disappearance and that he was sorry about getting me back so late. They thanked him, and then he was off, back to the station where Ralph and Rocky waited to join him. I barely ate any dinner and went alone to my bedroom right after. I knew he really couldn't take me with him, but it still stung that they would be going off to help my friend without me. He should have stayed at my house, or the station, or something. I felt like I could have done something to stop him from getting kidnapped. To top it all off, why didn't I get taken? What did Caden have that I didn't that made him a better target? What was the difference between us that meant he got taken and maybe killed, and I got to stay? I had no idea, and it made me sick to consider the possibility that this thing might be using Caden as bait to get at Jacobson or maybe even Ralph. My mind went in circles, trying to figure out if being a random snatching for the sake of a grander plan made it better or worse. My helplessness soon turned to anger, and I paced across my bedroom floor. Caden wasn't the first, far from it. Officer Jacobson hadn't seen his little brother in 2 decades because of that thing. There were others, but we didn't know because it got its hands on their files. How many were taken before 1974 that we didn't even know about? Why hadn't other police officers living in the 80s or 90s taken care of it already? I couldn't just sit there. Ralph's small overture to me in the police station stuck in my head. Why did he want me with them? I can't imagine he just wanted me as bait. If he did need me because it wanted kids and kids alone, he would have pushed Officer Jacobson harder than that. There was a reason why Ralph wanted me along with him that he didn't say out loud. Even though I'd been left at home, I resolved that I should go to the reservation anyways. My car was still dead. Even if it wasn't, I had no idea where that house was. At around 9 p.m., I realized that although Caden was missing, his car wasn't. His key should be on his desk if he stuck to his old habits. I also knew where the reservation was. The hard part would be finding a way on it without being caught and getting to Officer Jacobson, Rocky, and Ralph in time to help. I snuck out of my house at around 9:30. Caden's house was only a short 15-minute walk from my place, and to my luck, his car sat in the driveway untouched. When I went to the door, it was locked. Looking up from where I was standing in the driveway, I realized I'd have to climb up a drainage pipe onto the roof where his bedroom window was. It didn't take too long to convince myself into breaking in. I just thought of the vision Ralph's ritual had brought to me, and that boy that had been mutilated. I had to do this if I wanted to help bring it down. The window was unlatched, and the house was dark and quiet. A loud clock ticked away in the adjacent hallway. I turned on my phone flashlight and made my way to his desk. There were only a couple of items on it: a wallet, a knife, his car keys, and a notebook that I hadn't seen before. It was bound in simple cardboard and had a single red pen lying on top of it. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it to the first page. I recoiled involuntarily at the drawing scratched crazily into the first sheet. It was a crude drawing of a face, the teeth and eyes wildly out of proportion to the size of the head, and unsettling lifelike despite having been drawn in angry red pen. In Caden's familiar print, a single sentence simply labeled the drawing: "It goes on all fours." The room got cold, and I felt my blood quicken as my swiftly beating heart pumped even faster in my chest. Gingerly, I went close to the notebook to cover the nightmarish image when a gust of wind and a startlingly loud whistling sound flew in from the open window. The page turned, revealing a drawing of a map behind the face picture. There were only 3 roads on it, one of which I was familiar with by name and from experience. It led onto the reservation. In the bottom left corner of the map, a dark circle had been colored in with the word "cage" written in lowercase beneath it. I took the notebook off the table and crawled back out the window. The map sat open on the passenger seat while I drove Caden's car on long back roads which seemed to be all but forgotten. I realized that the map was probably taking me on a route which bypassed whatever checkpoint I'd normally have to go through to get on the reservation, which gave me pause while I rolled his small vehicle across rough dirt roads. It was his handwriting for sure, and I trusted my best friend. It was what led him to draw that map and hideous drawing that kept a small, cold rock churning in the pit of my stomach. I steeled myself for the possibility that I might have to come face to face with whatever it was drawing once I got to the cage. Soon enough, the barren and by all appearances abandoned house I had seen earlier that night loomed in front of the car's headlights. 2 police cars sat unlit and silent in the driveway. I stopped the car and stepped out. The night was cool and cloudless. Millions of twinkling stars cast down feeble light onto the desolate prairie around me. A slight breeze brushed through the small jacket that I was wearing, and lightly rattled the hardy desert grass like it was thin paper. I winced every time my shoes audibly crushed the gravelly sand, and right as I stepped in front of the house, the crickets stopped singing. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to leave right there, that what I would find inside could not be worth seeing even if I did find Caden. I pressed on, some strange new willpower burning in my chest like coal-fired engine pushing a locomotive. The screen door was the only obstacle to my entrance into the debilitated structure. Mildew and coppery decay flew through my sinuses when I breathed in. It was dark, and I used my phone light to show me the way. I didn't need it for long. Once the cold white beam illuminated the dirty kitchen I'd stepped into, a sickly yellow light joined in from an adjacent room. "I'm in the living room," Officer Jacobson's voice called out to me. I followed it into a room lit only by a lamp with a piss-colored lampshade that might have been white at some point in the distant past. Officer Jacobson sat in a flea-bitten old corduroy chair, which sat on top of an utterly filthy shag carpet. I was about to say a careful hello when I stopped to take in what was lying on the couch on the other side of the room. Rocky sat with his back straight and a gun in his right hand. The skin on his face had been flayed off, and his lidless, unfocused eyes stared at the wall. "Do you have a brother?" Officer Jacobson asked, as if nothing were wrong at all. "What the fuck is going on?" I stammered. "Are you an only child?" Jacobson continued, without changing his tone. "Where's Ralph?" I demanded, his absence suddenly making me more afraid than the dead body in the room. "Bleeding out somewhere in the desert, if he's lucky," he said, and stood up. "I bet you don't have siblings. If you're an only child, you don't really get it." I noticed the gun in his right hand and bloody potato peeler in his left. "I have 2 sisters. One's in college, the other lives in Colorado. She's been married for a year now," I said carefully, my eyes on the potato peeler. "I love them a lot." "So I guess you'll get it," he said absent-mindedly. "Get what?" It wasn't my fault. I went to go smoke instead of watch my little brother play with his friend. He's super weird and his friend's a retard, I told myself. Why would I spend time with them when I could be having fun? It was high school after all. Not like it'll ever happen again, you know? I thought I'd have to babysit him a lot more often than I'd be able to hang out in that fucking parking lot. He laughed and wiped a potato peeler on his pants. The sound of the blade on fabric might as well have been as loud as a gunshot. You didn't know that a goddamn skinwalker would kidnap him, I said. We need to find Ralph, and he can help us find Caden. It's too late. He nearly whispered. It's too late, and he has Caleb. He'll let him go. His voice tapered off, and he smiled wearily. He'll let him go. I stepped back, and he lunged at me with a yell. I ran out the door I came from, Officer Jacobson's heavy footsteps pounding the linoleum behind me. I had just stepped outside when his powerful arms hit me square in the back, and I went down. My mouth hit the ground, and I tasted blood. I turned around onto my back to see Officer Jacobson looming above me. A gunshot sounded, and I closed my eyes. My ears rang, but I felt nothing. Had I been shot? I cracked my eyes back open, and Officer Jacobson swayed uneasily, his hands empty of the weapon he was holding just moments ago. I sat up in time to watch him fall hard into the dirt next to me. A wild shriek came from the house, and Officer Jacobson turned over to grab my shirt, blood dripping from his lips onto the ground. Get the fuck away from here, he croaked. I stood up and hadn't ran for very long when I was stopped by another strong pair of arms. I screamed, and a hand clapped itself over my mouth. He will hear you, Ralph said into my ear. I stopped struggling, and he let go. His shirt was wrapped around his midsection, and on his side a dark stain came through the light old-fashioned fabric. A rifle was slung over his shoulder. What happened? I whispered. He got to him. He tricked Jacobson into thinking he could trade you for Caleb, he explained. Caleb is long dead, but Caden is still alive. I think. I could hear him in the basement. We have to go to the basement of that fucking place? Did you hear that scream? I said too loudly for his comfort. Be quiet. Yes, I heard it. But if we're going to save Caden, this is the only way. I've come prepared, Ralph said, reaching into the small satchel he had used to perform the ritual earlier that night. He pulled out a candle and a bunch of sage, and then grabbed a lighter out of his pocket. In a moment, he lit them both. Put your phone in your car. We can't bring electronics, he said. Why? I asked. Just do it, he insisted, and I complied. Follow me and do as I say. It's just you and me going in there. You have to trust me. Don't let it get to you. I followed him and his dim candles towards the now forebodingly lit house. Officer Jacobson hadn't turned the lamp off, and it now shined through each window like a steady, unearthly fire. We reached the house, and Ralph led us to a pair of latched wooden doors leading into the foundation. When he opened it, a thickly layered and sickly sweet aroma wafted out like a diseased oven that had just been cracked ajar. I followed the candle into the darkness of the basement. The sage helped with the smell, but not by much. The floor was concrete and wet, like a hose had been sprayed over it. The darkness seemed to go on forever, like there were no walls enclosing the space. Hey man, you found me. Caden's voice came from the black. Caden? I said back to the darkness. I didn't know if Ralph heard. Yeah, I'm in the corner. I can't find my way out. You need to help me, he said. Ralph turned around to face me. The flame perched on the candle fluttered precariously as a soft chill blew through the drafty structure. He's talking to you. Ignore it, he said severely. Dude, there was this Indian guy who was keeping me in here. Watch out for him, Caden said. I looked at Ralph. He's saying you're keeping him in here, I told him. He's lying, Ralph said, and began waving the sage out into the room, which was still untouched by the light of the candle with his other hand. He said a few words in his language, and Caden's voice changed into a low moan. Oh God, he's hurting me, he said. The same strange urge that I had first walking up to the house seized my chest again, and I grabbed Ralph's shoulders between my hands. He struggled to free himself, and in shifting around the candle went out and left us in pitch dark. It was silent for a moment, and then I heard a strange shuffling coming from somewhere in the room. To my left, Ralph cursed me out and sparked his lighter a couple of times before it lit. The candle came back to life and revealed what had been scratching around in the darkness. A grotesque mimic of a human being. Its arms and legs bent at odd angles from where they were attached to a thin and slimy torso, crawled with a halting, shivering gait like an injured horse. Its leering face snapped over to the new light, and a hissing noise flew from its impossibly wide mouth. It screeched again, the same banshee shriek that just minutes ago leaped towards us. Ralph's rifle went off twice, and the shrieking grew fiercer. It bodied me, and I crashed to the floor, the candlelight going out again. I could smell its stinking breath while it hovered just inches from my face in the dark. It screamed and shifted its weight off of me. An orange glow had emanted from the skinwalker's face, and I saw that Ralph had gripped its head in his hands and was singing a low chant to himself. I watched them struggle to the basement entrance, Ralph unwavering in his lock on the thing's misshapen cranium. In the light, dozens of transparent forms began to appear in the room with us, watching the grapple. I recognized one of them as the boy from my vision, his face intact and expression stoic. It was over quickly, and the skinwalker gave off one more screech before breaking free of Ralph's grip and scampering up the stairs. I was laying in the dark for only a moment when a flashlight turned on, and I heard coughing. The flashlight revealed that the basement was full of primitive cages made of weeds and rotten planks. Caden sat in one of them, dirty and scraped up. He was alive. It only took 15 minutes for the state troopers to arrive. They led Ralph, Caden, and I out of the dark basement, and Caden into an ambulance where a blanket and hot cider were waiting for him. Ralph went to go talk to the police, while I was allowed to talk to Caden while paramedics examined him. "You should have seen it, dude," I told him. "Ralph kicked its ass." Caden laughed. "Yeah, I saw," he said and looked away vacantly. "There are more in there," he said quietly. "The cops will take care of them. They're okay now." I tried to console him. He didn't say anything else, he just sipped his cider. The police took my statement, and while they interviewed me, I watched as the officers carried covered stretchers out from the basement of the house. A few days later, I learned that they found 9 bodies in total, all kept in those dirty cages like the one Caden had been imprisoned in. One of them was an unidentified child, and I knew it had to be Officer Jacobson's brother, Caleb. Things sort of went back to normal. I went back to school this week. I tried to recover a bit from all the stuff I saw last weekend. Caden's been doing half days, but he's going pretty strong given the circumstances. I've seen Ralph a few times, but he's older, so we don't have much to talk about. The police department has a new officer, another just out of college guy named Tyler. He's come by my house a couple times. Last night, in fact, he dropped by to bring me something. He rang the doorbell, and I was the one who answered. "Hi, I'm here on behalf of Bill Pratt. He just quit and told me that he wanted me to give you something since he was in a hurry." I looked at him confused. "I don't know Bill Pratt," I explained. "Maybe you're looking for a different guy?" "You might have known him as Rocky. He worked at the station for a while, or so he told me." I didn't hear the rest of the sentence. My vision blurred and my hearing dulled. "Rocky?" I stuttered weakly. "Yeah, just got back from the snow. Pretty good guy. I think he said he was going to Texas to work at the oil fields or something." Tyler just smiled and fished around his pocket, and he pulled out a little plastic bag and handed it to me. "It must have had some personal value, I guess," he explained. In the bag were 2 silver, bloody playing jacks. And that is the end of that story. The dialogue actually wasn't that bad. I feel like you guys are gonna understand it. I was freaking out over nothing, I'm sorry. That's just me being me. I'm gonna say it for the 100th time. I don't understand how people do that. How do you twist the story like that? I can never do that. Mine would be like, and everybody died in the end. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any stories that you want me to read, go ahead and send them to me. I always have my social media linked down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye. While the evidence was disposed, wait. I make up words when I'm reading these. I will close my Dr. Pepper too tight again. How can I get through one sentence that has a ridiculous amount of huge words and I can't say brushed?